Hello, everyone. My name is Rebecca, pronouns she, her, and I'm one of the co-directors here at the Notebooks Collective. Sorry, I'm getting weird pop-ups. Founded in 2021, we are a virtual literary arts space focused uh, on community connection and continued learning. Our next in conversation will be June 17th, 2025 at 7:30 p.m. with poets Jennifer Funk and Megan Pinto. And we have a class coming up with poet Jose Angel Araguz titled Rumination as Root, which will be on June 1st. And registration is open for both right now. So please check out our website at thenotebookscollective.com to see all the details as well as the information about events later this spring and summer. And as I'd like to add, the Notebooks Collective believes that Black Lives Matter and acknowledges that as a virtual organization, our offices are on the land of the Kickapoo, Nipmuc, Agawam, Massachusetts, and Pawtucket tribes. Native peoples across the world continue to preserve and celebrate their cultures, and we encourage you to support Native writers and artists. As we do this land acknowledgement, we want to recognize those who are suffering from conquest and terror in Ukraine, in Gaza, and elsewhere on the globe. Our thoughts are with them. We know that these are very extremely horribly stressful times, and we are glad you have joined us tonight to celebrate community. And I now welcome Lisa to introduce our speakers.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lisa. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the other half of the team here at the Notebooks Collective. In the book 10 Windows, poet Jane Hirschfield writes, "A good poem is a solvent, a kind of WD-40 for the soul. To feel oneself moved creates in itself an increase of freedom." I come back to this statement often when I'm feeling uninspired. I come back specifically to the word freedom. What kind of freedom, I wonder, increases when I find myself moved? The more I think on this, the more I realize that the answer changes depending on where I'm at in life, because I am moved in different directions depending on circumstance. And I suppose the freedom I need to seek also depends on what my world currently lacks or what I crave. The one constant, though, at least to me, is that before we can get to feeling moved or experiencing freedom, is being curious enough to seek the poem in the first place. It's curiosity for me that expands my reading, curiosity that opens my willingness to enter another world through a poet's work. Curiosity is what fosters wonder and a willingness to move into uncharted territory. Curiosity, too, is what brings Richard and January together for this event. When asked who he wanted to be in conversation with and why, Richard spoke of newly hearing January's work. They're friends now, but at first she was a new poet to him, and wanting to understand how she does what she does in her poems. It's the same reason we asked Richard to join us in this series, because we heard him read and immediately wanted a peek behind the curtain, so to speak. We were moved. We craved the freedom to understand, to learn, and to witness. And that's what brings us all together tonight, I think. Shared curiosity alongside a personal need for freedom, however that looks in our respective worlds. And now their official bios. Richard Hoffman has published 5 books of poetry: Without Paradise, Gold Star Road, winner of the Barrow Street Press Poetry Prize and the Sheila Motton Award for the New England Poetry Club; Emblem, Noon Until Night, winner of the 2018 Massachusetts Book Award, and his most recent, People Once Real. His other books include Half the House, a memoir, the memoir Love and Fury, Interference and Other Stories, and Remembering the Alchemists and Other Essays. He is Emeritus Writer in Residence at Emerson College in Boston and nonfiction editor of Solstice, a magazine of diverse voices. January Gill O'Neil is an associate professor at Salem State University and the author of Glitter Road, 2024, Rewilding, 2018, Misery Islands, 2014, and Underlife, 2009, all published by CavanKerry Press. Glitter Road was a finalist for the 2024 New England Book Award. From 2012 to 2018, she served as the executive director of the Massachusetts Poetry Festival. Her poems and articles have appeared in the New York Times Magazine, the Academy of American Poets Poem a Day series, American Poetry Review, The Nation, Poetry, and Sierra Magazine, among others. Her poem At the Rededication of the Emmett Till Memorial was a co-winner of the 2022 Allen Ginsberg Poetry Award from the Poetry Center at Passaic County Community College. The recipient of fellowships from the Massachusetts Cultural Council, Canem, and the Barbara Deming Memorial Fund, O'Neil was the 2019-2020 John and Renée Grisham Writer in Residence at the University of Mississippi, Oxford. She currently serves as the 2022 to 2025 board chair of the Association of Writers and Writing Programs, or AWP. O'Neil earned her BA from Old Dominion University and her MFA from New York University. She lives in Beverly, Massachusetts. I think that's the end. Sorry, I had something funny on there. I'm going to turn this over now to Richard and January. We're so glad you're here.
Well, thanks. Thanks, Becca, and thanks, Lisa. We really appreciate the opportunity to talk, and it's kind of interesting to do this deep dive into Richard's work. I tell my students that if you're going to really learn about a poet, to really not just look at like the poem or what's online. Dig into a book, and not just all of them. I mean, not just one, but all of them, from start to finish, to see how their career has grown. And I feel like I've had a chance to do that with Richard.
I with you.
Yes.
It's been a real pleasure. I mean, the last 2 days have been just devoted to reading through the entire body of your work and watching it grow, and understanding in some sense the relationship of those poems to what's happening. You're sort of right out on the prow of the ship, reporting, but doing so much more than reporting.
Right. Just thinking about your work, and poems that you wrote in some of your earlier collections still seem relevant now, especially the ones that lean more political. And I'm like, that is pretty amazing. So.
Well, things haven't changed very much, unfortunately.
Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah, there's that.
They may have become worse or more intense, but I don't think the dynamics have changed much, because the power changed.
I don't think we've learned very much either, but we keep writing the poems.
Indeed. So are you going to read for us a little bit, and then hand it back to me, and I'll read a little bit, and then we'll, after people have a little sense of our work, then we can move into dialogue.
Yeah, that sounds great. So I'm going to read a poem from each of my books. So I'll read 4 poems, and then I'll turn it over to Richard. So from my first book, Underlife, How to Make a Crab Cake. I'm a Virginia native, so food is very important to me, and it is dinner time. So, how to make a crab cake. Start with your own body. The small bones of the hands moving towards the inlets of the fingers. Wanting it too much invites haste. You must love what is raw and hungered for. Think of the crab cake as the ending, as you till away at the meat, digging for errant shells and jagged edges. Always it's a matter of guesswork, but you hold it together by the simplest of ingredients. For this is how the body learns to be generous, to forgive the flaws inherited, and enjoy what lies ahead. Yet you never quite know how it happens. The moment when the lumps transcend egg and breadcrumbs, the quiver of oil in a hot pan to become unworldly. The manifold of pleasure, with the sweet ache of crab still bright on your tongue. And this next poem is from Misery Islands. Misery Islands is the title. It refers to a set of islands off the coast of Beverly and Salem, Great Misery and Little Misery. So it seemed like the perfect metaphor for divorce. But this one is sort of being on the other side of that. How to love. After stepping into the world again, there is that question of how to love, how to bundle yourself against the frosted morning, the crunch of icy grass underfoot, the scrape of cold wipers along the windshield, and convert time into distance. What song to sing down an empty road as you begin your morning commute? And is there enough in you to see, really see, the 3 wild turkeys crossing the street with their featherless heads and stilt-like legs in search of a morning meal? Nothing to do but hunker down, wait for them to safely cross. As they amble away, you wonder if they want to be startled back into this world. Maybe you do too, waiting for all this to give way to love itself, to look into the eyes of another and feel something. The pleasure of a new lover in the unbroken night, your wings folded around him, on the other side of this ragged January, as if a long sleep has ended. I tend to throw my name into poems, so when you have a name like January, it turns into a bit of a Where's Waldo. But now that I'm working on another manuscript, I'm like, gosh, there are a lot of winter poems in this book. So it has its difficulties. So this poem is from my book from 2018, Rewilding, and it's a poem for my son, and it's called Hoodie. A gray hoodie will not protect my son from rain, from the New England cold. I see the partial eclipse of his face as his head sinks into the half-dark and shades his eyes. Even in our quiet suburb with its unlocked doors, I fear for his safety, the darkest child on our street in the empire of blocks. Sometimes I do not know who he is anymore, traveling the back roads between boy and man. He strides a deep stride, pounds a basketball into wet pavement. Will he take his shot, or is he waiting for the open mouth, orange rim to take a chance on him? I sing his name to the night, ask for safe passage from this borrowed body into the next, and wonder who could mistake him for anything but good. And so in 2019, I won the John and Renée Grisham Fellowship. It's actually one of those things that like you don't really apply for, it just magically appears. And that stuff doesn't usually happen to me. But I was feeling very fortunate. And so I took my teenagers down to Mississippi for a year in 2019, 2020. And before we went down, there was a photo that went viral of 3 Old Miss students holding, assault rifles next to a shot up marker for Emmett Till. Emmett Till being a 14-year-old boy who was beaten, shot, thrown into the Tallahatchie River in 1955. The marker was around where he was pulled out of the water. And these boys were, in this, they were just smiling in this photo, like they had done something. And so we were, that and a few other things made us concerned about making the move from Massachusetts to Mississippi. But, it turned out to be great and a wonderful experience. And there are good people everywhere. But that moment certainly gave us pause, and much of the writing around Glitter Road, my current book, was around Emmett Till and Mississippi and landscapes and the environment and new love. And so the title of this poem comes from a subhead from a USA Today article from July 2019. 3 Old Miss students use guns to vandalize a memorial to lynching victim Emmett Till. They pose their bodies as if they've just bagged their first 10-point buck. One holds a shotgun, another squats below the shot up sign, a third stands with an AR-15. Three faces, smiling, hoisting guns in front of a bullet-ridden marker. This is the site where Till's body was removed from the river. It is hunter's hours. The sign's jagged holes could slice a finger. Those students are someone's sons or brothers, not much older than the young black boy, his body beaten, tethered to a 75-pound cotton gin fan and thrown into the Tallahatchie. This is an old story, a Southern Gothic. To deny this boy's life and then deny the marker that says he lived breaks me every time. The camera captures the night-star cover, the tall grasses, the momentary flash illuminating their shit-eating grins and the gun barrel's glint. Lifetimes of getting away with it. So now I'm going to turn it over to Richard.
Oh, Jan, that was wonderful. That's
Thank you.
a great way to begin. I'll pick it up with, I'm going to read the first poem I ever published. Deep in the previous century, in 1973. It's a poem called Yet, and it's a meditation on that word. Yet. Sounds East European, doesn't it? Yet. A town in the Urals, the western border of Asia, where everyone hurries calmly through the narrowest of streets to rocky fields, hard, patched by snow so dry it hurts. Yet, every single day they make their way there. Every night come back. Yet, the ring of an ancient Egyptian god, an animal, probably like a muskox, slowly dragging tomorrow from over the mountains. Can a word be a god? Can anything but a word be a god? For us, I mean. Always and never arriving. Umbilicus, vision, promise, deadlock. The deciding vote has not been cast yet. I, Pharaoh by default, acknowledge you most powerful of all. O Lord of heads sometimes, tails sometimes, Lord of the other hand, there is no escape from you yet. And this is a more recent poem from People Once Real, and it's called Vaccine. What is the word for the way the starling's sheen and the carapace of the Japanese beetle seem alike? And if I find it, will the dying stop? Words don't come easily to me. I used to think they were afraid of me. They hid in my chest, in my belly. Will the right ones make the dying stop? What word is there for the way some words, unsaid, erase you? For our hope not to hurt again? For what to say to make the dying stop? I chose those poems to read because my fascination with language and its mysteries remains to this day, and is really the grounding for all of my work. And this is a poem about work, and I chose it because Jan has some wonderful poems about work. And this is called Doorman. And it was a real job I had at one point. Doorman. Bright buttons, white gloves, polished shoes. I kept the glass clean and the brass knobs shining. A captain's hat and trousers creased and striped, some tatting on the sleeves, a touch of braid. It might have been a soldier's uniform. Over and over, day after day, I opened the same door for the same rich people who pretended to think we were equals, while I, who needed the job to pay rent, pretended to believe they thought so. I was so bored it made me happy to run into the street and blow my little whistle, then stand there holding the door of a cab as if I'd just caught a great big fish. Even if what I do now doesn't matter as much as I want to think it does, even if I'm a fool in other ways than I was back then, I never want to do that kind of work again, over and over, day after day, opening the same door for the same rich people. Uh, the experience of violence as a boy, I mean, in a way, that's redundant in America to even say that. Uh, Boyhood is the experience of violence in America. But in this case, this is a poem that has in it a sexual assault. So I suppose that's a kind of warning. It's called Formica. I'm 11. My father hears me say fuck and decides it's time for the talk. It's my mother's kitchen, but she's not there. I believe he was a little drunk, just loose, not sloppy. He began several times, starting over, pulling on a tall brown bottle, saying my skinny body would pretty soon change. I watched from far behind my thank you, daddy, good boy mask as he said that men and women fit together. And yes, he used his finger and made the O like okay, sliding in and out. The man's organ, he used the word organ, becomes inflamed. He used the word inflamed until it spits a seed inside the woman, and that's how babies come. Do you have any questions, son? He said that it was beautiful, really, as if he knew he'd failed to make it seem that way. He said that it was holy. He didn't know my coach with his crooked organ had already inflamed my pretty body, burned me to ash. And there and then in that kitchen, I froze what was left of the two of us, like cut bait. Decades gurgled in the pipes below the sink. The clouds in the tabletop purled like smoke. On the wall, sad Jesus pointed to his heart. The calendar offered a dozen scenic elsewheres.
Mm.
I may read one more here.
Please do.
Well, thanks, Jan. I, I'm going to read a poem about teaching. It's called Humanities 101, an essay.
Mhm.
First day, I give out the syllabus, tell them what I have planned, and that the readings will address individual freedom on the one hand and responsibility on the other. A couple of them look interested. The others inspect one another. One asks how they'll be tested. Or I wonder, how will I? Each time I stand here, scared, every fall, I ask myself what I have to teach these novices. Who am I, after all, but another who inclined toward convention and away from injury, who hid in the crowd, a coward, crowd, coward, rhyme of the century. The last one, that is, almost in fact the last one, when the end of history was declared by those who in effect were writing it and hiding in theory their conceptual Trojan horse, saddling this generation, like mine, with another of their filthy wars. I feel inadequate and asinine, like some dried out whiskey priest remorseful in trying to make of his pocked and broken life at least a bold, exemplary mistake. Yet Icarus, the moth boy, with neither chart nor fear, with a surfeit of strength but no sense, has begun to feather the great wings' width and length with perfect, long gray goose quills sitting in the back of the class. And Antigone, by wireless email, tells her Uncle Creon he can kiss her ass. So that once again, as in the fables, rebellion's back on top of evil, as the tilted planet turns the tables, making the tyrant sun god shrivel, dunked again in the daily water. Nothing now but a picture postcard an errant son or zealous daughter might send home, or homeward, anyway, to where their parents, with their new corrective spouses, hope to rediscover innocence individually, in separate houses, in a century in which we all are free to believe we can begin again, so long as we behave responsibly by watching the world on Fox or CNN.
Oh, that's wonderful. It's so, you actually picked out poems that I had picked out to talk
Well,
about. So it
so
was
I could go
wonderful to
home
hear.
early.
Well, it was wonderful to hear them, but to hear them in your voice. And so, I was thinking about that. I was reading, I think it was Barbara earlier, in the same book with, Formica, and thinking about work, thinking about Philomene a little bit, and the teacher poem that you just read. I also had marked that. But I wanted to kind of jump in with a little bit of a question that I hadn't planned to ask. But what is it like for you to look over the scope of all these poems, to read them again? I mean, I know you're working on some other projects, but what is it like to sort of revisit? I was thinking about poems that I don't do this often, but I occasionally want to revise something. Like there's a word that sticks out every time I read this poem or that poem. And so, but to look at the work and the span of work and think about the intricacies and how they fit into your life and who you were then and who you are now. What do you think about looking over some of these poems again?
It's terrifying. I am putting together this new and selected that'll be out next year in February.
Mhm.
Um, and that's one of the most difficult things I've ever done is just trying to
Mhm.
lay out those poems and decide first to make selections from 50 years worth of work and then
Mhm.
try to make a book of that. Uh,
Mhm.
it's the problem with it is every time I pick up a poem, I remember its writing. I remember where I was, what I was going through. Uh, and so I'm sort of wildly hopping all around in my own autobiographical chronology,
Mhm.
and it's exhausting
Mhm.
and confusing. Uh, you know,
Mhm.
uh, and I guess also, certain patterns show up. Um,
Yeah.
And I had expected that, but I hadn't expected that there were so few themes that I kept returning to, and that those patterns were so evident.
Mm.
And I didn't know how to feel about that. I thought, wow, am I stuck? Have I been stuck for 50 years?
So I'm sorry, are you saying that you can see like the same themes or patterns coming, or that you've written about so much that there doesn't seem to be connective tissue?
No, no, there's too much connect.
Yeah.
There, I guess, I mean, some people would call them obsessions, but they're just the overriding or overarching facts of my life.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up with two brothers dying of a chronic illness in my
Mm-hmm.
household. And
Mm-hmm.
so I do write, and of course they're both gone now, and I do write a good deal about grief, and
Mm-hmm.
I write from uh, a I write as a person who's been formed by grief and awareness of mortality.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not anybody who's lived into their 70s is aware of their mortality, or and worse, the mortality of the people you love.
Mm-hmm.
Grieving is worse, I think, than dying.
Yeah. You know, Natasha Trethewey has said that, you know, the main theme in her work is bereavement. And so she comes back to the tragedy of losing her mother, now her father. Eric has passed. So, I mean, I don't think of those as, I do think of those themes, the things that we write about often, complications, obsessions. I do think that you know, I think all writers have about, I tell my students this, all writers seem to have probably, you know, at least for me, 5 to 6 things that I come back to over and over again. But the perspective changes as we get older and we get more experience. So, you know, you can write about pain or grief, but as you move through life stages, you know, you were a young man and now you're father and now a grandfather. I mean, you know, your perspective changed all along.
Yeah, it does. It does.
Yeah.
But you know, I mean, I think the flip side of grief or mourning or bereavement is and mortality is the erotic, and I find that dimension so your work is so suffused with
Mm-hmm.
an appreciation of bodily existence. I mean, just the reality of the emotions live in the body. They're not ideas.
Mm-hmm.
They are physiological responses to things happening.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel very grounded reading your work and thrilled by the eroticism in it. That is just it gives no quarter to the Puritans on one hand or the pornographers on the other. I mean, it's about really being in your body, and
Mm-hmm.
and the poem of uh, you know bathing your mother uh,
Mm-hmm.
is as erotic with a small e in that larger or sense of being comfortable with the sensual world.
Mm-hmm.
That's as erotic as any love poem, and so is the poem of teaching your daughter, uh, of potty training your daughter.
Yeah, she
And
hates that poem, by the way.
I get that, but
Yes, my 19-year-old hates that poem that I wrote about her when she was
oh,
two
she'll
and a
love
half.
it again. She'll love it again though later. It's just not
Maybe.
a good time.
Just not her time. All right, that's one way to look at it.
You don't you don't pass the baby pictures around at
Yeah.
graduate.
Yeah. You know, yeah, I mean, that's interesting you say. I mean, you know, in Glitter Road, you know, it was definitely a more physical poem, but that was sort of poem book, more representative of kind of where I was in life after, you know, having a relationship after a very long absence of connection. But I think I have always written about connection and relationships and intimate moments. Um, you know, and maybe that has changed. I mean, maybe that has just changed as my life has changed, you know. And certainly when I was a younger writer and the kids were younger, it was very physical. I mean, Ella eating crayons and, sitting with my son and, you know, at all his baseball games and, you know, and so and then moving towards being able to think more about me and the world and being in the right place to do it too. I mean, like you, I remember where I was when I've written almost every poem, and all of those feelings come back. And it's I often think, thank goodness I am able to look at a moment twice, you know, when it happened, and then to turn it into something more, you know, with a poem. You know, thank goodness. That's my little bit of gratitude for the day.
Mhm.
You know, and yeah, so you know, yeah, I mean, it's been a fun journey to get to where I am now and to be able to have a little life wisdom, to be able to see the moments for what they are. You know, we were talking yesterday about how we enter poems from different directions, you know, in a way where you come in through language, and I think I come in through a moment or imagery. Um, and I find that, really kind of wonderful and revealing that we're going to the same place. We're just, taking different directions. Um, as I was revisiting your work, I was thinking about something you said last night about sequences and how, you're working on this manuscript, but you actually have to have one for your, um, your more classic poems, I guess, or shorter poem. I don't know. And then your sequences, I'm like, I think you have sequences in all of your all of your books. And I really got that, like, you know, 5, 6, 7, 8, 12 sections. And I think I'm really fascinated by that. Like as somebody who's probably written 2 long poems, significantly long poems in her career, maybe 3. I'm fascinated that you have something like that in your book. I mean, it's like a long meditation. I think, you know, uh, looking at things from different angles, from different perspectives, could you talk about like putting together like those longer poems in your books and what that's like?
Sure. Yeah, and you touched on it when you said, looking from different angles and
Yeah.
uh, I, when
I was
I
really, I will say, I was really fond of Moon Until Night, the title poem there.
thanks. Well, that was also a game I was playing with myself, which is a part of, I think, what keeps me engaged with language.
Hmm.
I do, I mean, the last poem I read, the poem about teaching, was in rhymed
Yeah.
quatrains.
Hmm.
I hope you didn't hear it banging on you, but
No,
yeah,
but I did hear it.
yeah. Um,
Yes.
and so I like to have some sort of game that I'm playing because that's how I quiet the cerebral part of my
Hmm.
mind. Where I can overthink anything. I'm
Hmm.
uh, and so I have to give that something to do, and that allows for surprises, things to come into the poem, because I'm concerned with, filling out this next line. It's
Hmm.
something from me. And I end up learning from the poems as opposed to knowing what it is I have to say and saying it, which
Hmm.
I do when I'm writing essays,
Hmm.
or prose. Uh,
Hmm.
uh, so the game in Noon Until Night was literally to start at noon and to bring in each of the blank sonnets that are the sections of that poem, was to
Hmm.
bring us from noon until 1 o'clock. And
Right.
the second goes from 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock in subtle ways. I mean, there are references to the numbers in,
Hmm.
and I didn't know how apparent that would be to a reader, but
Hmm.
it was, it kept drawing more and more of what I had to say out from my uh, unconscious, I guess, or just from the pool of possibilities that we all carry around with us. Um, and it helped me tap into that. And games, formal games or uh, even just patterns that you make up because they seem inherent in the first 4 or 5 lines that you've written and you want to keep the pattern going.
Hmm.
Because when I do that, I'm not in the driver's seat. I'm,
Hmm.
I'm trying to steer.
Hmm.
And so the engine is not my intention. My intention is not the engine driving the poem.
Hmm.
Uh, Something else is being uh, summoned by the game I'm playing.
What do you think about
Doesn't
form?
sound too woo, but
Well, no, I was
I
thinking
try to get
about
out of the way and leave the intention for revision.
gone on. I think, I think you have gotten maybe a little more personal in each book. I don't think you write, I know I'm I write a lot about myself and my life, and I'm the subject of a lot of my poems. But I can see in each book that there's a little bit of the I in your work, and and that poem for me is certainly emblematic of it. Not all of the sequences, not all the sections, but certainly a few of them. And I wonder about form and content for you. So I wonder, is form a good way of controlling what you are talking about? Does it put the brakes on the games that the mental tricks that you play to try to get more out of yourself? Do you find that, is it more pulling a thread to see what happens, or do you find it a good way to sort of contain some of the more personal, expressive, maybe even painful thoughts?
Mhm. That's a good question. Thanks for that. I'm
Thanks.
not sure I have the answer to that question. I think that it's more of a it's not a protection so much as it is an invitation,
Mm.
or if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
The formality of and I don't write always in form, but
Right.
there's an element of form to whatever we write.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I am not a first thought, best thought person. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's the best words in the best order
Yeah.
are often not the first thought. I'm trying to find that, which is why you go back so many years
Right.
later and change a word or change a line, because you get that that wasn't the best word, or that wasn't the best order for the word.
True. Well, I'm curious then about revision for you. It's like I don't particularly like revision, but I do it and I know I get good work out of it. But like, I guess I am a little bit more first thought, best thought, but I definitely revise. I
Oh yeah,
don't,
it's
yeah,
clear. I mean,
yeah.
the sonic dimension in your work, the music of it, the voice in it,
Mm,
cannot be mistaken for. It's not arch or artificial, but
mm.
it's not mistaken for somebody wrote this poem in the car on the way to the reading. So we've all been to readings like that where someone said, I
Yeah.
just wrote this on the way over, and read it off their phone. Uh, no, I don't think either of us worked.
No.
So I have my question for you is like, when did you first understand that being a poet was going to be your life,
Mhm.
that it's central to who you are?
Yeah. Um, I think for me it was maybe a little later than most. I mean, I was in college and I was always good in English in high school, and I mean we didn't have a lot of books around the house, but we had, encyclopedias. We had the World Book.
Mhm.
And so, I did a lot of reading with that. But I took an 8 a.m. Econ class, and I did not do well at 8 a.m. as a freshman. I thought I was going to be a business major. And so I did not do well. So, but I moved on. I took a creative writing class and I studied with Toy Derricott and Ruth Stone. And Toy was really, she turned me on to Allen Ginsberg, Howl, best minds of my generation, starving, hysterical, naked. And then Sharon Olds. And that's like a 1-2 punch. In fact, I think the poem that made me love Sharon and love poetry was The Victims. I think it was from the Golds, maybe the Golds, maybe it's Dead and Living. But it's about how she fires her father and equates him with Nixon, and Nixon leaving the White House, and I'm just like, well, you can fire your father, and so I'm an only child, so I had a little bit of a tumultuous relationship with dad. Um, so being able to, like, you can say this in a poem, and it's the same feeling I had with Ginsberg, same feeling I had with Sharon Olds, same feeling I had with Lucille Clifton. And I think it was about feeling. And then Toy would say things like, go out and have an experience and write about it. Like, go find a sensory deprivation tank. Do something like that. I didn't. Um, but I remember that year I volunteered at a children's a homeless shelter and a children's shelter, and it was rewarding. And I wrote poems. I didn't do it just for that, but like that's that type of life where you could be a part of the world and write about the world. And that I mean I think I was chasing a feeling. I certainly wasn't going to school to be a poet, right?
Right.
Because they make so much money. And then I took a bit of a gap, and then I moved I got in NYU with Toy's help. And Toy introduced me to Sharon and got me off the wait list. So there's something about connections that does work. And so
Mhm.
I got off the wait list, and then like I knew I was going to do it. I didn't know what my career would be like. I didn't think I would teach, and I taught. So, but I always knew poetry would be central for me. And once I figured that out, made all my other life choices easier.
Mhm.
I've had a lot of weird different jobs, but once I kind of like formalized what I knew I kind of wanted to do, then you could sort of I took jobs as editors, and I worked on a college campus for years, and so that made things easier. Like I could be around writers and writing and art, and then eventually, teaching came and the Mass Poetry Festival came, and I did those things hand in hand. Said I couldn't run the festival without insurance. So Salem State picked up the tab, and they've kept me on ever since.
Well, that's great. That if yeah, if it sounds like it was a gradual embrace of what it was going to take from you, and I mean, it's not an easy road. I mean,
Yeah.
it sounds strange, or
Mhm.
what's the word I'm looking for? It sounds uh, silly, really, to talk
It
about
does.
how hard it is to be a poet. I mean,
Yeah.
come on.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it is, because you're allowing a dimension, I think,
Hmm.
uh, of engagement with the world to swell
Hmm.
and be a
Hmm.
huge part of who you are, walking
Hmm.
around and
Hmm.
and using language to grasp the world in a way that it can be onerous. I
Hmm.
feel like I'm always sneaking up on myself, trying to catch myself thinking something, and then put it into words, and
Yeah.
that dimension can make you nuts, and have to
No.
uh, and so it's at once a gift and an affliction, I think.
Yeah, I agree with that. Sometimes I'm in moments and I'm thinking to myself, oh, this could be a poem. And then I'm like, well, am I really enjoying the moment, or am I just looking for something more to write about? So I kind of understand that weird dimension part.
There was a New Yorker cartoon, uh, uh, it was or was it just an anecdote about James Thurber, and he was staring off into space, and his wife hit him with her elbow and said, "Thurber, stop writing." They were at a party or something, you
That's
know.
perfect. That's perfect.
Uh,
So so what brought you to poetry? Because I know that, I think you were thinking other genres.
well, not so much other genres, but a whole other. I had a whole other mindset coming out of high school. I fell in love with poetry in high school,
Hmm.
but it was just they were the classic English poets that we were,
Hmm.
and I loved that stuff. I loved Keats's sonnets. I
Hmm.
loved Blake. I still do.
Hmm.
Though there's probably most of the iceberg of Blake is remains underwater for me, and I don't quite. Um, but I went off to college. Uh, this may sound uh, silly or trite, but but with my brothers at home with muscular dystrophy, I thought someone's got to find a cure for this. And that's going to be me because there's nothing else that's worth doing. At
Mhm.
least that's how things appeared to me as a high school student. So I was really big on the sciences, and I was going to study genetics and find the cure for muscular dystrophy. And I went off to college and uh, took a poetry class in my freshman year uh, that completely uh, changed my course. And I just knew at that point. And then I also wrote a few poems for the student magazine. And the professor from that class sought me out and said, "This poem here, I really like this poem. This is like a professional poem." And I felt so blessed by that, like I had been knighted or something. And I thought, yeah, this is really what I want to do.
Mhm.
And that's been a constant ever since. But I think that that sense of poetry having some kind of power to rectify things or heal
Mhm.
or correct
Mhm.
things is a big part of my work. I mean,
Mhm.
that poem "Vaccine" says it really.
Yeah, it does.
Uh, and it's like, is it if we could just get the language right. I mean, there's so much mendacity and foolishness around us that is a misuse of language. So I kind of go back to what Yeats said about the poet being, protecting the language of the tribe,
Mhm.
purifying.
Mhm.
Job is to continue to purify the language. It keeps getting cloudy and full of blood and gore and hatred and ugliness and somehow you've got to rinse off the words like they were seabirds caught in a oil spill or something. You
Yeah.
just uh, and
Wow.
yeah. So I think there is a through line from the desire to uh, to make a difference in people's lives and the kind of poems I'm writing or I've
When,
always.
well, when I read your work, I consider myself flawed. And so reading your work, I feel like I'm reading the work of a flawed man trying to figure out a flawed world.
Yeah.
And I love the wit and the irony that comes out in some of your work. I love like that trace of language that like is a needle and thread sort of sewing everything together. Um, I really enjoy the pacing of your poems as well. And again, hearing you read them out loud, I think is says that. I'm trying to think of like what poem, really encapsulates that. I mean, Formica was one that I appreciated, and because it's more narrative,
Mhm.
and I find your work, rather lyrical.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's fair.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but
So
those things inhabit one another. I mean, that even in a narrative poem, there ought to, it's got to be
yes,
lyrical at the same time. In a
yes,
lyric, there's at least a shadow story behind.
yes.
Lyric. I think of like uh, a lyric as the song in a musical. I mean, the play
Mhm.
is going along, and then suddenly somebody stops and there's a song, and
Mhm.
that, and so the lyric can sometimes be the song that uh, from which you infer the story.
Mhm.
Uh,
Mhm. So, could you talk to me about writing poems that lean towards the political?
mhm.
And how do you keep them? So when I read your work, I always think you give us an opportunity. You're always educating us. You're giving us you're offering an opportunity for us to learn something or expand upon, something we see in the newspaper, but put a humanity to it. And so I'm fascinated and, in how do you keep how do you balance the facts of the moment but also staying present and by staying present and carrying that heart throughout the poem? And so I'm thinking, of some of the poems in Gold Star Road, and I have to look. I'm thinking of a specific one, but it's escaping me right now. It just breaks me when I read it. I was also reading out, actually, as I was reading Hoodie, I was also thinking of your poem, An American Boyhood, about Tamir Rice, which is really kind of what my Hoodie poem is about.
Sure, sure. Do you have that poem there?
Mm-hmm.
I would love to hear that poem in your voice, if that's.
Oh, I would love to. I was actually thinking about that with Noon Till Night, so I would love to do that. 20. Okay, so this is Richard's poem, An American Boyhood, which is in his book, Noon Until Night. My toy gun looked just like the gun my father carried in the war. It looked like the guns on TV. I learned to make the sound of gunfire with my mouth. No one made the sound of a ricocheting bullet better. A loud plosive, followed by a little whistle. Now you have to help me with this word. Diminuto?
Diminuendo.
Diminuendo. Okay, thank you. I spent a lot of time in my fantasy world, drawing on bad guys, pivoting and crouching. I holstered my gun, drew it again. When I got bored, I sat on a swing and wondered where everybody else was. I did all these things. If you had an American boyhood, so did you. Tamir Rice had an American boyhood. His was a black one, a short one. Yeah. I mean, Tamir Rice was a 13-year-old boy who was playing in a park with a toy gun, and the police rolled in on him and just shot him.
Mm-hmm. And they wouldn't let his sister go to him while he was dying.
Right. It's just that's one of those tragedies that just keeps compounding itself. And so, I read this poem, and it's not easy to talk about these subjects, and it's certainly not easy to, talk about race, but you do it here very subtly, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Well, it's again, it's part of the our moment that we swim around in and tread water in and try not to be defeated by. And I mean, you have a poem in Glitter Road in which you ask, what is the work of witness? Dante Wright, George Floyd, and Philando Castile were killed in your neighborhood.
Yeah.
And I think that they were killed in my neighborhood. It goes back to there's a poem in Gold Star Road that starts with a quotation from Wisława Szymborska, and she says, "Tortures are just what they were, but the world has shrunk, and now they seem only a room away." And I think that that's true. I mean, we're looking at photographs of murdered children every day. And, so what's my place? How do I respond to that other than sometimes closing the door of my room and crying for a while? How do or what do I do with the rage that I feel that somehow all of the international bodies that were created to make the world a lawful place have become completely ineffective. And yeah, and I mean, I had written about that in People Once Real in Mundus et Infans, is about the plight of children in a militarized, violent world. And I think, I mean, James Baldwin said it, the children are all the children are ours everywhere. And if you don't understand that, you're incapable of morality. And so I think that's where we're stuck. And so I keep writing about children. I keep writing about what children are faced with because we can't reset our moral compass unless we uh, decide that any real morality has got to be based on uh, what's good for the next generation and the generation after that. You know, it's not about following the rules. It's about being responsible to and for children, wherever they are. And anyway, I don't, you could get me ranting on that subject for a good long time, uh, but that is what is pretty much central to the poems I'm writing now, is that understanding and trying to address that. I mentioned to you last night, I'm trying to write poems about being a grandfather that are as beautiful as your poems about being a parent and a lover and a daughter and all of that. Uh, and with the complete absence of sentimentality that makes your poems work so beautifully and and deepens the emotion of it, because there's never a sharp or a flat in those poems. I mean, you're never reached too far. You're not trying to jerk tears out of us. You're, at the same time, you're really following the contours of the uh, feelings in that situation, whatever it is. And I would like to be able to do that about writing about being a grandfather, and not, when you say, "Oh, I'm writing about being a grandfather," people go, "Oh," and no, 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 no. I mean, this is serious business. These are these are the people to come. They're already here, you
Yeah.
know, and we dismiss them as children as opposed to thinking about their lives into the future and beyond when I'm going to be here. But I haven't figured out how to do that, because I am kind of a sentimental schlub when you get right down to it, and I have to be very careful.
I think if you could take what you just said about, trying to break it down and it's something against sentimentality. I think if you can take that and put that into a poem, I think that would be the poem.
Well, all right. I'll look forward to the recording of this, and we'll see.
I think that's perfect. Oh, well, I have, I have a few more questions, of course. Um, I'm actually glad we spent a little time on American Boyhood, so thank you for that. Um, again, had a lovely opportunity to kind of look at your books again, and I think your poems are rightfully complicated. I think your language, your use of language as sort of your grounding, um, the what grounds the poems, I think makes them remarkable. Um, I don't know how you're going to put it together new and selected and actually take things out. Um, you have a fascination with the world that really, lays it bare. And I think what you were saying earlier about, what our responsibility is of writers and, you know, eh, for yourself and it made me think of what it's like to be a writer. But I was also thinking too about service.
Mhm.
And, you and I have both worked for large organizations, volunteered for large organizations. And so what do you think about the poet as a literary citizen?
Hmm. It's an interesting and it's kind of a new concept.
Yeah.
The poets of the parent generation, the poets I looked up to when I was young,
Mhm.
I mean, they would have not thought for a moment that the poet has some sort of political responsibility or social responsibility, or I mean, I'm generalizing in ways that I should not. I mean, Muriel Rukeyser just said, "What are you talking about me?" No, Muriel, I'm not. Uh, uh, but there's a different. I think it used to be the poet was the solitary, and now I think that poetry happens in community, and poets support one another, and as opposed to compete with one another
Right.
or critique one another. If we do that, it's
Mhm.
meant to be helpful and encouraging. Uh,
Mhm.
and also, we learned one way or another, and boy, is the point being driven home now that literary culture is something that you really need to tend like a garden, or it will just disappear.
Mhm.
Um, uh, and and there are adversarial uh,
Mhm.
forces at work that would like it to disappear because it's well, for all the obvious reasons, it it's it shapes consciousness in complicated and
Mhm.
ways that admit complication and nuance and all of that, which is just the opposite of uh, power-seeking politicians uh,
Mhm.
who want to want you to cleave to a particular narrative.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think it's important. That's why AWP is important for
Mhm.
that reason because pe people need the community. It's hard work. Uh,
Mhm.
and Penn was very much a community and the organization is very much a political organization in that its first principle is the defense of free expression.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
that's under threat now as never before in our lifetimes anyway.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. In thinking about the role of poetry, I've really seen a change, in poets being more active. Honestly, I've really seen it in the poet laureate position. I
mhm.
mean, at one point it was an honor, and so it was bestowed upon a poet who deserved it, and but like you said, didn't think about going out and starting programs. And I mean, I think pretty early on, I'm not sure the order of the laureates. I'm not sure if it was Robert Pinsky or Billy Collins or Rita Dove, but they all did social projects.
Right.
And then I think with the internet and the opportunity to go out and do more, really to grow community. I mean, it sort of felt that way with, Joy Harjo and Tracy K. Smith and now Ada Limon, who's just stepped down. But I think now more than ever, I think we need the arts and we need community. And I feel like I'm speaking to the choir here. So, um, yeah, and I want AWP to have a more active role. I know a lot of organizations have lost funding. And it's just heartbreaking. It's not just the arts, it's science and research and you
Right.
name it. And so I'm hoping that we will get, hopefully in 3 years we'll get back to funding these very big things, but really it's going to take everyone. It's going to
Well,
take everyone.
it occurs to me an indicator of the change and going back to the idea of the laureate is not just the U.S. laureate. I mean, I, I could not have imagined when I was in high school or college that towns would have
Right. Yeah.
the
Yeah.
poet laureate of Salem is our good friend J.D. Scrimger. It's the
Yeah.
inaugural poet laureate of Salem. I have a, a dear friend, Tom Maluk, who was the poet laureate of Bucks County, Pennsylvania.
Hmm.
And he used that position to start a poetry corner in the local newspaper that's still going.
Hmm. Yeah.
And the people who submit to him are not people who call themselves poets. They're people who
Right.
written a poem or two or three.
Yeah.
Uh, and all of that is this spade work in the garden, I mean,
Right.
we talked about MFA programs and the proliferation of MFA programs and
Hmm.
how there are now so many books being published, and poets all want to break out of the pack because you want your work to be noticed and you want
Right.
readers, but the market is so glutted with books. Uh,
Right.
a- and and as I said in our previous conversation, I think this is all good though. In a, a brutal and militarized country, to
Hmm.
see people suddenly more and more people want to spend their time writing poems as opposed to whatever.
Right.
It's a good thing. It can't help but humanize us.
Yeah. I mean, that is one of the benefits I think of social media. I mean, if people want to send an image of a poem or a few lines and it reaches people and they stop for a moment, and they connect with somebody or with an idea, or even if they just feel better or feel a little gratitude. I mean, I think it's going to take an infinite number of small moments like that to get us through this period.
Yeah.
But we all have to start somewhere, and we have to work. And I agree with you. Like the the number of state laureates and city laureates, and I discounted it at the beginning, but now I really see the value of it. It's just like that community rallies around somebody who's saying, "Look, come here. This is important." And I like to say too, the laureate position. Boy, I hope we can keep it. There is not a dance, as far as I know, there is not a U.S. dance laureate. There's not a short story laureate. It is something that we have protected. And so I am hoping that along with funding for arts, we can, at this point, re-envision,
Hmm.
So I'm hoping that we can keep our our U.S. laureate, which is a public-private partnership, but it's got an office at the Library of Congress, so let's think good thoughts for the next laureate.
Which, yeah, the Library of Congress, which no longer has a librarian.
Well, that's a whole nother story right there.
And that's a great place to stop because we have a couple of questions, so we have a couple of questions, but before that, we have a request for January to read the poem that Richard referred to about bathing in
Oh,
water.
I thought, yeah. Should I read it now?
That would be great. And then we'll make sure we get the other questions in and then we'll wrap up.
Okay. Give me a second. Okay, so this is a book. This is in Misery Islands, and so my mom's a breast cancer survivor. So, bathing my mother. She braces herself against the rush of hot water, and her whole body responds in relief. The first she's had all morning. Leaning against the shower wall, we begin the way I would if I were bathing a child, quickly, as not to prolong this simple act. I lather soap between my fingers, carefully unfurl my washcloth over her skin, so as not to touch her new breast missing its nipple. It is all business, my hands rotating in circles down her hips and between her legs, her body slick as a sea lion's. She reaches around for the cloth with slow and deliberate movements, as if not to admit pain, not to convey need. The caregiver needing care, the caretaker not taking as she usually does, not today. I want to tell her I love her, but I don't. I cover her with a towel and some small talk, try not to notice what's missing. No words, yet I listen like a stethoscope for her to say something. So, thank you for that. I haven't read that in a while.
Hey, listening like a stethoscope is.
Yeah.
Thank you. My mom was a nurse, so it was actually nice to get that line in.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
We have two questions and 10-ish minutes. So the first one is, what can one do when one starts overthinking when a piece is baked? What can one do when the poetry seems MIA, when pieces from a different time were so full of poetry? I think
Could
this
you read,
both of you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
could you read that one more time?
Sure. What can one do when one starts overthinking when a piece is baked? What can one do when the poetry seems MIA, when pieces from a different time were so full of poetry?
Are those two questions or just one?
Well, it's two questions in one package.
Okay. Okay.
The two
Okay.
questions, yes. And then we have another.
Okay. I'll take a stab and maybe Richard could clean up the mess that I'm about to make. I think when you overthink a poem, I mean, like if you know you are overthinking a poem, then I mean that says a lot. So I would leave it alone. I would, there is no rush to get, I mean, depending on what the project is in general, there's no rush to get it out. There's no rush to have it seen. It might be helpful to have a friend look at it. If you don't have the luxury of somebody to look it over with you, then you might read it out loud. Maybe you record yourself reading it and use your ear as a guide. Because if you know you're overthinking it, then you could probably hear it when you speak it back. So I would listen for the places that make you tweak a little bit, and I would listen to the places that feel flat. And I would look at both of those, and I would go to where the heat is. I'd also go to where it just doesn't feel right. And I would take a look at those and see what can be done. Maybe it requires taking things out. But if you've just written a poem and you feel that way, then I would let some distance happen between the time of writing to when you think it's done. And I would ultimately trust your gut. And maybe the second part, when the poetry seems MIA, that's just like generally when you're not writing. I mean, I actually, you know what? When Richard and Nick Flynn came to Salem State virtually, so must have been pandemic times. You remember that? I remember Nick getting a similar question. And maybe this is writer's block, so I hope I'm generally answering it. And Nick said, I don't have writer's block. When he's not writing, that means he's living. And I have taken that to heart. So there are times where it's just not, you just don't have the energy to write. There are other things that are creeping in. The world is too much with us, as the poem goes. And I think it's okay not to write. I mean, I'm not writing right now. I'm filling the well as I think of it. So it's okay to allow yourself not to write. But if you really feel like you're close, I mean, reading helps. So reading in all sorts of genres and reading people that maybe you don't particularly like, just so you can see what's possible. You can see what other people are doing and say, I don't want to do this. Or what's out there and you could do it your way. So those are my two general answers.
Well, if I was going to take a stab, I didn't have any mess to clean up. What were you talking about? Didn't leave me a mess to clean up. I think, first of all, one of the things that's important is read it aloud. If you're overthinking the poem, a poem comes out of your body and comes and is shaped by your voice. It's breath as art. And if you say it out loud, even record it and listen to yourself reading it, you discover all kinds of things. You discover the places where you wince. And it may not have anything to do with meanings or content, or it may just be sound. Like, that just sounds awful. Or, I can't put that word next to that word. And then when you start to move things around, the poem comes alive again for you. The other thing is I want to say is that by the time I some poems, not all, but some poems, by the time I publish them, they're 25 or 30 years old. I mean, because I had a stanza and it was really going, and then I hit a wall, and I don't know where the poem is taking me. I don't know what this poem is trying to tell me about what kind of poem it is and why I'm writing it, or why it's here on the page in front of me. I used to write on these gigantic newsprint pads by hand. And I would write a line, and then if the next line didn't come, I'd repeat that line, and I'd keep literally writing it just like writing it till my hand would pick up another word or a phrase or a line. And then as things would consolidate into stanzas, I would keep adding them until I'd have columns. And maybe by the end of one big newsprint page, I would have a draft of the poem. Now I work much more on the keyboard than I ever used to do. I still love writing with a fountain pen. I mean, I grew up in a time when we had to bring a blotter to school, because we had fountain pens and inkwells, and yikes. I mean, that was a long time ago. But I keep these notebooks that I write in every day, and usually they're just complaints, me pissing and moaning about the weather or something one of my kids did or something somebody said to me. But also, just in all of that writing, there are phrases that occur, or an image, or a memory that I'm writing about. And I'm not trying to make something out of it right now. It's just in the notebook. It's captured. It's in there somewhere. And I have pulled out notebooks from 15 or 20 years ago and said, hey, that's pretty good. Why didn't I finish that poem? Well, I didn't finish it because I didn't know the things I know now. I was younger. I didn't have whatever experience is, subconsciously influencing my understandings now. And so I couldn't finish the poem. To me, that means it was a genuine poem, that it really has a relationship to my life and my inner life. And so then I sometimes can finish something that I started 15 or 20 years ago. And so what I've done now, because I'm hearing Time's Winged Chariot, is I had a wonderful teaching assistant at Emerson. And then when we went into the pandemic, she became my quote unquote research assistant so that she could continue to be paid. And in that process, one of the things I asked her to do was to transcribe all these old notebooks, and read my cursive and put it all in as text. And then, I don't know if Livia is here, but if she is, it's a shout out to her of gratitude. Livia Menegan, who's a wonderful young poet, is still doing that for me. I send her 2 or 3 notebooks at a time, and she transcribes them and sends them back, and I pay her. But then I have it as manipulable text on my computer, and when I'm scrolling through, I say, "Ooh, that's a great line." And I'll put it over in another file, and pretty soon some poem will start to crystallize out of that stuff. And so it's a much more of a slow cooker than it's more of a crock pot than a stir fry.
That's amazing. Can we move on to our next question, which is, do either of you have advice or counsel for someone who is working on their first poetry book? And we have just literally a couple of minutes if you want to finish up with a poem each.
All right, I'll be really brief. There's no rush to put it out. You should put out your poems that you're comfortable living with for the rest of your life out in public. So, I mean, so you really do want your best work out there. And I like to think of it as A poems and B poems. So your A poems are the ones that these are really good. These are memorable. Your B poems might be bridges, between the A's and the B's. So you don't, from your bridges from like A to A, like they connect a theme, or, you have a connection to it that's sentimental and you're not ready to let go of it. But those ones that are like, try to stay away from those in a collection. But, I think that might be the core of what I want to say. Just be comfortable with everything in there, and there's no rush, maybe look at everything you can look at them individually, but you also want to maybe lay them out and look at them as a whole and look at the form as well as the content. Look for patterns, do all of your poems start with after the lake or after September, or you're looking for themes and repetition. Do you have a bunch of poems that look a certain way? Like, are they all prose poems? And should you mix them up a little bit? Sometimes you don't know until you print or look at them on screen and see what they look like as a grouping. So, what Frost said, you got 24 poems and then the 25th is the book itself. I'm paraphrasing.
Mm.
Richard, do you have anything different or that
Well,
you'd
just
like to add?
yeah, I don't know how I don't know the age of the poet asking the question, but it's I didn't publish a book of poems until I was 50, and I knew I was a poet and that poetry was central to my life for 30 years before that, and I was publishing here and there in magazines, but I didn't bring a book out until I was 50. And so I guess patience is I don't see there's not a hurry to like hang out your shingle, you know. It's not like the money is going to come pouring in or the job offers or none of that is going to happen.
I think that's so encouraging and also depressing. Thank you, Richard.
Well, I was foolish enough to think that I would publish
I know.
my whole life was going to change and I would be this other person that I was aspiring to, and none of that happens.
Sure. Do you each want to read a quick poem?
Sure.
Yeah, I can. If we're short on time, I defer to Richard.
No, you go ahead, Jan.
Oh, great. No, all right. If you've got one, Richard, just go.
Okay. Let's see. I will read this elegy called This Close, and it's in memory of my brother Bobby.
Mm-hmm.
Bobby was a year younger than me. We were sort of Irish twins. We did everything together. And yeah, it's called This Close. Little brother, I have forgotten our secret, but I remember your cupped hand and steamy breath in my ear. I believe you are near, adjacent my 5 hungry senses, with me as if in the spaces between my fingers, between the letters of my name, between the numbers of my years, in sounds too high for ears, too low for even foot soles. Sometimes I can almost see you, shadow of a helpless fish in the curl of a breaking wave, or hear you like halyards clinking on wobbling masts in the foggy harbor. And recently the grieving animal I am cooked up your likeness in a dream. You recognizably you, but nothing like the way I remember you, your round face intent upon surviving. I never wonder who you might have become, never think of you as almost, rather as weightless counterweight, as abstract afterward, ungone, a visitor from nowhere. You are where all the waters go, where I take myself to soothe myself, to find a way to understand your absence, how aging I grew into it, grew onto it like a trellis. Is it your death or mine or ours or everyone's I am moving through the whole length of this life you left so early?
Thank you. All right, I'm going to read one for Ella, and this my daughter, who's home from college today, who we moved home from Massart. For Ella. I love a wild daffodil, the one that grows where she's planted, along a wooded highway left to its own abandon, but not abandoned. Her big yellow head leaning toward or away from the sun. Not excluded, but exclusive, Her trumpet heralds no one, not even the Canada geese, their long-necked honks announcing their journey to somewhere else. She'll be here less than a season, grace us with slender green stems strong enough to withstand rain and spring's early chill. And when she goes, what remains she'll bury deep inside the bulb of her. Take a part of me with her until she returns. How lucky I am to love this bloom.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Thank you. Well, this has been wonderful. Thank you all. Thank you.
Yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed this evening. Can we just keep going?
Yeah.
I think we gotta get another dinner on the books.
It's one of those things where people like, oh, an hour, that's so like, how are we going to fill the time? And then it just flies by. But I wanted to hop on to thank you both so much for your time and for this conversation tonight. It was amazing. We are so grateful that we get to have time like this. And so we ask, if you enjoyed it, to please follow the Notebooks Collective on our social media accounts and sign up for our newsletter if you haven't already. Lisa will put the link in the chat. We have a lot of great events like this coming up the rest of the year. And before we close out, if people would like to unmute, would love to get a round of applause for our guests. Or you can leave a little love in the chat.
Thank you all. Thank you. We feel it. We feel it. Woo.
And we thank you all for coming and wish you all a good night.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And thanks, January.
Yes, thanks, Richard. That was great.
Another dinner on the books, definitely.
Yes, absolutely.